A little girl cried on the sidewalk, holding a drawing soaked by the rain. She shouted at the man in the suit, "You fired my mum. Now she can't buy my medicine." The executive, shaken, couldn't respond and got into the car in silence. But that sentence haunted him, and what he discovers changes everything. The autumn wind swept through downtown Chicago, carrying the first whispers of winter as 5-year-old Emma Thompson stood outside the towering glass facade of Morrison Industries. Her small fingers clutched a crayon drawing so tightly that the edges had begun to crumple. The paper showed 2 stick figures, one with long brown hair like her mother's, another in a dark suit, connected by a bright red heart she had colored with extra care that morning. Emma had been waiting for almost an hour, her pink sneakers growing damp from the sidewalk puddles. She knew he would come. Mommy had shown her his picture in the newspaper, the man with the serious face and expensive clothes who had made the decision that changed everything. Robert Morrison, CEO of Morrison Industries, the man who had taken away her mother's job, and with it their ability to buy the medicine that kept Emma feeling strong. The black sedan pulled up to the curb, just as the streetlights began to flicker on. Emma's heart raced as she watched the familiar figure emerge from the back seat, tall, imposing, checking his phone with the practiced efficiency of someone who counted minutes in millions. She had rehearsed this moment dozens of times in her head, but now her legs felt wobbly as she stepped forward. "Excuse me, mister," Emma called out, her voice barely audible over the city traffic. Robert Morrison paused, his hand on the building's revolving door. He glanced around, clearly not expecting to be addressed by someone so small. When his eyes finally found Emma, confusion flickered across his features. "Are you Mr. Morrison?" Emma asked, holding up her drawing like a shield. "I made this for you." Robert's expression shifted from confusion to mild irritation. He had 3 board meetings that evening and a conference call with London scheduled in 20 minutes. "Little girl, where are your parents? You shouldn't be out here alone." Emma's chin trembled, but she stood her ground. "My mommy is at home. She's sick, and I wanted to ask you something very important." She took a deep breath, the way her mother had taught her before difficult conversations. "Why did you fire my mommy from her job? She worked really hard for you, and now she can't buy my medicine anymore." The question hit Robert like a physical blow. He stared at the child, at her earnest brown eyes and the way she held that crude drawing as if it contained all the hope in the world. For a moment, the bustling Chicago street seemed to fade away, leaving only him and this little girl whose life his decisions had irrevocably changed. Robert began, then stopped. What could he possibly say? That her mother, Sarah Thompson, had been one of 200 employees laid off to improve quarterly profits. That her position in customer service had been deemed redundant during the company's restructuring. That he had signed the termination papers without ever considering the human faces behind the statistics. Emma waited patiently, still holding out the drawing. "Mommy says you're a very important man who makes big decisions. I thought maybe if I asked you nicely you could give her job back. She's really good at helping people. On the phone. She always helped me with my homework too." The weight of the child's simple logic crushed something inside Robert's chest. He had built his career on making difficult decisions, on prioritizing efficiency over sentiment, but standing there, faced with the innocent faith of a sick child who believed that kindness could solve the world's problems, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: shame. "I have to go," Robert muttered, pushing through the revolving door without taking the drawing. Emma remained on the sidewalk, her small hand still extended as the glass door spun shut between them. Through the lobby windows, she watched him stride toward the elevators, his phone already pressed to his ear. She waited for another few minutes, hoping he might come back, that maybe he just needed time to think about what she had said. But as the rain began to fall more steadily, Emma finally tucked the drawing inside her jacket and began the long walk back to the small apartment she shared with her mother. The buses cost money they didn't have, and she had learned to navigate the 6 blocks home by counting streetlights and remembering the store signs her mother had taught her to recognize. By the time Emma pushed open the door to their tiny 1-bedroom apartment, her clothes were soaked through. Sarah Thompson looked up from the couch where she had been resting. her face pale but brightening at the sight of her daughter. "There's my brave girl," Sarah said, though her voice carried a tremor that had become more pronounced since losing her job. "How did it go, sweetheart?" Emma climbed onto the couch beside her mother, pulling out the damp drawing. "He was very busy, Mommy, but I gave him the picture and told him about your medicine. He said he had to go, but I think he heard me." Sarah's heart broke as she looked at her daughter's hopeful face. Emma didn't understand the full gravity of their situation, how the Cobra insurance payments were eating through their tiny savings, how the specialized medication for Emma's autoimmune condition cost more than Sarah had ever imagined possible. She had been rationing Emma's doses, praying that a part-time job or temporary work would materialize before their supply ran out completely. "You did wonderfully, baby," Sarah whispered, pulling Emma close. "Sometimes grown-ups need time to think about important things. Why don't we make some soup for dinner? I found some crackers in the cupboard." As they heated the thin vegetable broth that would serve as their meal, Sarah tried to maintain the cheerful facade that had become second nature since the diagnosis. She sang softly while stirring the pot, told Emma stories about princesses who overcame great challenges, and pretended not to notice when Emma discreetly slipped some of her crackers back into the box when she thought her mother wasn't looking. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep clutching her crayon box like a talisman, Sarah sat at their small kitchen table with bills spread before her. The rent notice was marked final, the utility company had sent a shut-off warning, and the pharmacy had called twice about the overdue medication payment. She had submitted dozens of job applications, but the economy was tight, and customer service positions were increasingly being outsourced or automated. Meanwhile, 43 floors above the Chicago streets, Robert Morrison stood in his corner office, staring out at the city lights. He had completed his meetings, finalized the quarterly projections, and approved the budget cuts that would improve Morrison Industries' market position. By every measure that mattered to shareholders and board members, it had been a successful day. But he couldn't stop thinking about Emma Thompson's drawing. It now sat on his desk beside reports and contracts, the crayon colors seeming to glow under his desk lamp. The child's question echoed in his mind with uncomfortable persistence. "Why did you fire my mommy?" Robert tried to rationalize his discomfort. He had made hundreds of difficult decisions throughout his career. Layoffs were an unfortunate but necessary part of business. He couldn't personally know every employee, couldn't consider every individual circumstance. The company employed over 15,000 people across 3 states. Sarah Thompson had been one small part of a much larger, strategic restructuring. Yet something about the encounter had shaken him. Perhaps it was the way the child had looked at him with such trust, such certainty that he would do the right thing if only he understood. Or maybe it was the memory of his late wife, Elizabeth, who had always insisted that their success meant nothing if it came at the expense of their humanity. Elizabeth had been gone for 3 years now, and Robert realized he had used his grief as an excuse to distance himself from anything that required emotional engagement. Work had become his refuge, numbers and strategies a safe alternative to the messy complications of human connection. But tonight, faced with the innocent faith of a sick child, he felt the walls he had built around his heart beginning to crack. The next morning, Emma woke to find her mother collapsed on the kitchen floor. Sarah had been trying to prepare breakfast when a wave of dizziness overcame her. Emma's screams brought their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who called for an ambulance while Emma held her mother's hand and whispered the same story Sarah had told her during their darkest nights. At Chicago General Hospital, doctors confirmed what Sarah had been trying to hide from her daughter. Her own health had deteriorated significantly since losing her job and insurance. The stress, inadequate nutrition, and lack of proper medical care had aggravated an underlying heart condition she had been managing privately for years. Emma sat in the hospital waiting room, still wearing yesterday's clothes, clutching the same crayon drawing that had been rejected 24 hours earlier. A social worker approached with gentle questions about relatives and emergency contacts, but Emma's focus remained fixed on the double doors that separated her from her mother. When visiting hours resumed, Emma found Sarah connected to monitors, looking smaller and more fragile than she had ever seen her. "Hi, baby," Sarah whispered, managing a weak smile. Mommy just needs a little rest, okay? The doctors are taking good care of me." "I still have the picture for Mr. Morrison," Emma said, carefully smoothing out the wrinkled drawing. "Maybe if he sees you here, he'll understand better. Maybe he'll give you your job back so you can get better." Sarah's eyes filled. With tears she tried to hide. The doctors had been clear about the costs of her treatment, about the medications she would need, about the specialist care required for both her condition and Emma's. Without insurance, without income, their options were devastatingly limited. What neither Sarah nor Emma knew was that a hospital volunteer had recognized Emma from the night before. The volunteer's daughter worked for a local news station, and the story of the little girl who had waited in the rain to confront her mother's former boss was too compelling to ignore. By evening, a camera crew had arrived at the hospital, and Emma's simple plea for help was broadcast across Chicago's evening news. The segment was brief but powerful, footage of Emma holding her mother's hand in the hospital, interspersed with her earnest explanation of why she had made the drawing for Mr. Morrison. The reporter had done her research, connecting Morrison Industries' recent layoffs to the human cost embodied by the Thompson family's struggle. Within hours, the story had spread across social media, shared thousands of times with hashtags calling for corporate accountability and healthcare reform. Videos of Emma's hospital interview were uploaded and reshared, her small voice asking why companies couldn't help sick families resonating with viewers across the country. Robert Morrison first learned about the news coverage when his assistant knocked on his office door at 10 p.m., tablet in hand, and an expression of barely controlled panic on her face. "Sir," she said, "there's something you need to see. It's about the little girl who came here yesterday." Robert Morrison stared at the tablet screen in his office, the glow illuminating his face as he watched the hospital footage for the fourth time. Emma's small voice filled the silence as she explained to the reporter why she had made the drawing, her innocent belief that people could change their minds if you just asked them nicely enough, echoing through the room. The final shot showed her curled up in the hospital chair beside her mother's bed, the crayon drawing pressed against her chest like a talisman of hope. The story had exploded across social media platforms within hours. Heart of Paper was trending nationally, with hundreds of thousands of comments calling for Morrison Industries to take responsibility. News outlets from coast to coast had picked up the story, transforming Emma Thompson from an unknown child into a symbol of corporate accountability. But it wasn't the mounting public pressure that shattered Robert's carefully constructed emotional walls. It was the haunting memory of Emma's unwavering faith that good people would do good things when given the chance. Robert pushed back from his desk and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Chicago's skyline. Somewhere out there in a hospital room he had never seen, a little girl was fighting for her health, while her mother worried about bills that would never stop coming. He had spent 3 years building barriers around his heart after Elizabeth's passing, convincing himself that business required cold logic, that personal feelings were a luxury he couldn't afford in the competitive world of corporate leadership. But Elizabeth's voice echoed in his memory with startling clarity, her favorite saying that had once guided every decision they made together. "We're only as successful as the lives we touch positively, Robert. Money is just paper, but kindness writes itself on hearts forever." The next morning, Robert made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. Instead of his usual tailored Armani suit and Italian leather shoes, he dressed in simple jeans and a navy sweater, clothes he hadn't worn to work in over a decade. He drove himself to one of Morrison Industries' customer service centers in his personal car rather than the company limousine, parking among the modest vehicles of his employees. Walking through the cubicle maze, Robert observed conversations he had never bothered to overhear before. A young father named Marcus was patiently explaining payment plan options to an elderly customer struggling with medical bills, his voice gentle and understanding. A single mother called Rosa was helping a confused client navigate their account while simultaneously keeping an eye on her toddler, who played quietly in a corner with coloring books. Her own child's drawing was taped proudly to her computer monitor, a family stick figure portrait remarkably similar to Emma's artwork. These weren't just positions to be eliminated for quarterly efficiency gains. They were lives, families, dreams, and responsibilities that depended entirely on the decisions he made from his isolated corner office 43 floors above street level. Each conversation he witnessed represented someone's livelihood, someone's ability to pay rent, buy groceries, afford medicine, or send their children to school. Robert spent the entire morning walking through different departments, introducing himself to employees who had only seen him in company newsletters or annual video messages. He learned about Maria's night school classes, about David's elderly parents who needed care, about Jennifer's daughter who was starting college in the fall. Each story added weight to his growing understanding of how disconnected he had become from the human foundation of his business empire. That afternoon, Robert called an emergency board meeting in the company's main conference room. The 12 board members gathered around the polished mahogany table, expecting another quarterly review or strategic planning session. Instead, they found their CEO standing before a simple presentation slide that read, "The Morrison Foundation, investing in our greatest asset, people." "I want to establish a comprehensive foundation program," Robert announced to the stunned executives. "We'll provide support for former employees facing hardship, medical assistance programs for current staff and their families, job retraining initiatives, and community development projects in every city where we operate." Board member Jonathan Hayes, a 60-year-old man who had built his reputation on ruthless cost-cutting strategies, leaned forward skeptically. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the conference room lights as he frowned. "Robert, I appreciate the sentiment, but shareholders won't understand charity work. Our fiduciary responsibility is to maximize profits and returns on investment. This sounds like feel-good public relations that will drain resources." "Our responsibility," Robert replied firmly, thinking of Emma's drawing and her question about fairness, "is to remember that our company succeeds because of people, not despite them. A workforce that feels valued and supported will always outperform employees who live in fear of the next round of layoffs." Margaret Walsh, the board's longest-serving member, cleared her throat thoughtfully. "Robert, what exactly are you proposing in terms of scope and budget allocation? We need concrete numbers and implementation strategies." Robert had spent the previous night preparing detailed financial projections, something that surprised him with its thoroughness. "I'm proposing we allocate 5% of annual net profits to foundation activities. This includes emergency assistance funds, healthcare supplementation, educational scholarships for employees' children, and small business loans for former employees interested in entrepreneurship." The room buzzed with whispered conversations as board members digested this unexpected proposal. Some looked intrigued, others concerned, a few openly skeptical. The foundation's first beneficiary was Sarah Thompson. Though Robert arranged this assistance quietly without fanfare or publicity, he personally called the hospital to ensure her medical bills were covered, arranged for comprehensive health insurance for both mother and daughter, and created a new position for Sarah in the company's community outreach department once she recovered sufficiently to work. Sarah's new role would involve coordinating assistance programs, visiting employees facing hardships, and helping to identify families who could benefit from foundation support. It was work that would utilize her natural empathy and understanding of struggling families, while providing her with the stability and benefits she desperately needed. When Emma learned that her mother would be returning to work with full medical coverage and a stable salary, she spent an entire afternoon creating a new drawing. This masterpiece showed 3 figures holding hands under a bright rainbow with the words "Friends Forever" written in purple crayon across the top and small hearts floating around the figures like confetti. She personally delivered it to Morrison Industries' reception desk, asking specifically that it reach "Mr. Robert, who helped my mommy." For the first time since their initial encounter, Robert accepted Emma's gift with genuine gratitude, framing it immediately and placing it on his desk where he could see it throughout each workday. But not everyone celebrated this dramatic transformation. Rebecca Martinez, Morrison Industries' ambitious 38-year-old vice president of operations, had spent 5 grueling years positioning herself for the CEO role. She had sacrificed personal relationships, worked 80-hour weeks, and ruthlessly eliminated inefficiencies throughout the company's operational structure. Rebecca viewed Robert's newfound compassion as dangerous weakness, a betrayal of the ruthless efficiency principles that had built Morrison Industries' market dominance. She believed that sentiment had absolutely no place in serious business, that Robert's emotional decision-making was jeopardizing everything they had worked collectively to achieve over the past decade. More importantly, Rebecca recognized a golden opportunity to discredit Robert's leadership and claim the CEO position she felt she had earned through dedication and results. She had climbed the corporate ladder through strategic calculations, innovative cost-cutting measures, and a reputation for making difficult decisions that others avoided. Working late nights and weekends, Rebecca meticulously documented every foundation expenditure, every policy change that prioritized employee welfare over immediate profit margins, every decision that could be interpreted as fiscally irresponsible. She built a comprehensive case suggesting gross mismanagement of company resources, implying that Robert's personal emotional involvement with the Thompson family represented a serious conflict of interest that fundamentally compromised his business judgment. Rebecca's exhaustive research uncovered the foundation's funding mechanisms, the confidential assistance programs Robert had quietly implemented, and the policy adjustments that had benefited dozens of struggling employees and their families. She compiled this sensitive information into a detailed report, complete with financial projections showing potential profit losses and shareholder impact analyses. Then, with calculated precision, Rebecca strategically leaked carefully selected portions of her research to financial journalists who specialized in corporate accountability investigations. She chose reporters known for their aggressive questioning of CEO compensation and corporate spending practices, ensuring maximum negative impact. The resulting newspaper headlines were devastating. Morrison Industries CEO uses company funds for personal charity project and corporate compassion or financial misconduct inside Morrison Industries' controversial foundation spending. The investigative articles questioned whether Robert's emotional response to viral social media pressure had led him to make dangerously reckless decisions with shareholder money. Within 48 hours, the positive narrative surrounding the Morrison Foundation had shifted dramatically across all major media platforms. Social media comments that had once praised Robert's humanity and corporate responsibility now questioned his fundamental business judgment and fitness for leadership. Concerned shareholders began demanding detailed explanations and financial accountability reports. The board scheduled an emergency review of Robert's leadership effectiveness. But the cruelest consequence of this media scrutiny fell directly on Sarah and Emma Thompson. As journalists dug deeper into their personal story, their private struggles became public property once again. Photographers camped outside their modest apartment building, shouting questions whenever they appeared. Anonymous online commentators accused Sarah of manipulating her vulnerable daughter to gain sympathy and financial benefits from a guilty CEO. The relentless stress and public exposure caused Sarah's carefully managed health condition to deteriorate rapidly, landing her back in Chicago General Hospital just 3 weeks after she had started to recover and return to normal life. The situation became exponentially more dire when Child Protective Services received multiple anonymous reports questioning Sarah's ability to adequately care for Emma while managing her own serious health issues. The reports suggested that Emma's welfare was at risk due to her mother's unstable medical condition and their previously documented financial instability. Janet Pierce, a social worker with 20 years of experience in family services, arrived at their apartment on a rainy Tuesday morning, carrying official paperwork that could potentially separate mother and daughter until Sarah's medical condition stabilized permanently. "Mrs. Thompson," Janet explained gently, her voice professional but kind, "our primary concern is Emma's immediate welfare and long-term stability. With your recent hospitalizations and the ongoing stress from media attention, we need to ensure she has consistent, reliable care. We've identified several qualified foster families who could provide temporary support during this difficult period." Emma, who had been listening from her bedroom doorway, crept forward, clutching her newest drawing, a picture of herself and her mother surrounded by protective hearts with the words, "Never apart," written in shaky, determined letters. "Please don't take me away from Mommy," she whispered, her brown eyes wide with fear. "She takes really good care of me. I can help take care of her too. We're a team." Sarah's heart shattered as she watched her daughter's innocent faith collide with bureaucratic reality. "Emma has been through enough trauma," she pleaded with Janet. "Separating us now would cause more harm than any temporary instability." When Robert learned about the custody threat through Sarah's frantic phone call, he felt a rage unlike anything he had experienced since Elizabeth's passing. The child who had awakened his conscience, who had reminded him of his own humanity, was now paying the price for his attempt at redemption. He realized that feeling sorry and making charitable gestures weren't enough. He needed the moral courage to act decisively, even if it cost him everything he had built. The emergency board meeting convened on a grey Thursday morning in Morrison Industries' executive conference room. Rebecca Martinez had prepared meticulously for this moment, armed with detailed financial projections showing how the foundation's expenses had negatively impacted quarterly earnings and shareholder returns. She had rehearsed her presentation multiple times, anticipating every possible question or objection. Standing before the assembled board members with confident poise, Rebecca presented her case with clinical precision. Shareholders invest in Morrison Industries for consistent returns and market growth, not for charitable activities that belong in the non-profit sector, she stated, clicking through slides of financial data. Mr. Morrison's recent emotional decision-making suggests he has lost sight of our fundamental fiduciary responsibilities to investors and stakeholders. She detailed how the foundation's expenditures could have instead been returned to shareholders as dividends or reinvested in expansion projects that would generate additional revenue streams. Her presentation painted Robert as a leader who had been compromised by personal feelings and media pressure. Robert listened to these accusations in careful silence, remembering Elizabeth's advice about choosing battles wisely and fighting courageously for principles that truly mattered. When Rebecca finished her methodical presentation, he stood slowly, his decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. "You're absolutely right about one thing," Robert said, his voice calm but resolute, surprising everyone in the room. "I have fundamentally changed. 3 months ago, I would have seen Sarah Thompson as an acceptable casualty of business efficiency. I would have dismissed Emma's question without a second thought, viewing it as an unfortunate but irrelevant consequence of necessary corporate restructuring." He looked directly at Rebecca, then addressed the entire board. "But that little girl reminded me of something I had completely forgotten, something my wife Elizabeth tried to teach me throughout our marriage. Our success is meaningless if it comes at the expense of our basic humanity." Robert moved to the window, gesturing toward the city below. "Yes, the foundation costs money. Yes, caring about our employees reduces short-term profits and quarterly margins. But building a company that people are genuinely proud to work for, that strengthens communities instead of exploiting them for maximum extraction, that's an investment in long-term sustainability and loyalty that no spreadsheet can adequately quantify." Margaret Walsh leaned forward thoughtfully. "Robert, can you provide specific examples of how this approach might benefit the company beyond moral considerations?" "Employee turnover has dropped 30% since we implemented support programs," Robert replied. "Customer satisfaction scores have improved significantly because our staff feels valued and motivated. We're attracting higher quality job candidates who want to work for a company with strong values. These improvements will compound over time into substantial competitive advantages." The room fell silent as board members absorbed this information. Robert continued with growing conviction. "If you vote me out today, I'll accept that decision gracefully and wish this company continued success. But I will never apologize for remembering that behind every employee identification number is a human being with dreams, struggles, and families who depend on them for survival and security." Jonathan Hayes, who had initially opposed the foundation concept, cleared his throat thoughtfully. "Robert, I've been thinking about my own grandchildren lately, about what kind of world we're leaving them, what kind of business practices they'll inherit. Maybe there's room for both profitability and genuine compassion in how we conduct business operations." One by one, other board members began to share. their own perspectives. Stories emerged of their personal family struggles, of loyal employees who had shown extraordinary dedication during difficult economic periods, of communities that had supported Morrison Industries through various challenges and downturns. Rebecca watched in growing dismay as the narrative shifted away from her carefully constructed argument for pure profit maximization. The final vote was 8-4 in favor of maintaining Robert's leadership and significantly expanding the Foundation's mission and resources. 2 weeks later, Robert Morrison held his first public press conference in over 3 years. Standing behind a simple podium decorated only with the Morrison Foundation logo, he spoke without prepared notes or scripted statements, choosing instead to speak directly from his heart. 3 months ago, a 5-year-old girl named Emma Thompson asked me a question that fundamentally changed my life, Robert began, his voice steady but emotional. She asked why I had fired her mother, why I had made a decision that prevented her from getting the medicine she needed to stay healthy. I didn't have a good answer then, but I believe I have one now. He carefully pulled Emma's original drawing from his jacket pocket, the red crayon heart slightly faded but still clearly visible. This remarkable child taught me that business isn't just about quarterly numbers and profit margins. It's about the lives we touch, the communities we serve, and the moral responsibility we have to each other as human beings sharing this world. Robert's voice grew stronger as he continued. The Morrison Foundation isn't charity work. It's simply good business. It's a strategic investment in the kind of future we want to build together, where success is measured not just in dollars but in the positive difference we make in people's lives. The press conference was broadcast live across multiple networks, with Emma and Sarah watching from Sarah's hospital room where she was recovering from her latest health episode. Emma clapped excitedly when Robert held up her drawing for the cameras, pointing at the television and telling her mother with pure joy, "He kept it. He really kept my picture all this time." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she watched this powerful man publicly acknowledge her daughter's simple wisdom and courage. The Morrison Foundation flourished beyond Robert's most optimistic initial vision. Sarah Thompson became its community outreach coordinator, using her own difficult experiences to connect authentically with struggling families throughout the Chicago area. Emma, now healthy and thriving in school, became the Foundation's beloved unofficial ambassador, personally distributing handmade heart drawings to families receiving assistance and bringing smiles to even the most challenging situations. 6 months after their first life-changing meeting, Emma presented Robert with an especially elaborate drawing. This masterpiece showed a large building surrounded by dozens of smiling stick figures, with the words "Helping House" written in rainbow colors across the top. At the bottom, written in her neatest first-grade printing, she had added, "Thank you for not being scared to care about people." Robert had the drawing professionally framed and hung it prominently in the Foundation's main office lobby, where it served as a daily reminder to staff and visitors that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest questions asked by the purest hearts. Rebecca Martinez eventually resigned from Morrison Industries to join a competitor firm focused exclusively on cost reduction and profit maximization. Her departure was barely noticed by most employees, as the company had discovered something far more valuable than ruthless efficiency: the genuine loyalty and dedication that naturally develops when people feel valued and respected rather than treated as expendable resources. The Morrison Foundation grew into a nationally recognized model for corporate social responsibility, inspiring other companies to examine their own practices and community impact. But Robert never forgot its humble beginning in a 5-year-old girl's innocent question about fairness and compassion. Every heart drawing that arrived in his office mail reminded him that the most important business decisions aren't made in boardrooms. They're made in quiet moments when we choose to care about each other's welfare. Emma Thompson, now 7 years old and excelling in 2nd grade, continued making drawings for Mr. Robert, as she still called him with affectionate familiarity. But these newer artworks were different. They depicted playgrounds being built in underserved neighborhoods, families moving into safe, affordable housing, and children receiving medical care that their parents could actually afford. Each colorful drawing served as a testament to the incredible ripple effect of intentional kindness, proof that when one heart chooses compassion over indifference, it can transform not just a company, but an entire community's understanding of what genuine success truly means.